When did you first, Jordan Belfort, thanks so much for coming on.
I'm looking forward to this. I know our good friend Dan from London, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Sometimes the change you're looking for is the change that you do not expect. The reason I started my show is very similar to why I started it today, and that is I want to meet great people, I want to learn from them, and I want to create business opportunity. We are all here today, hopefully, want some change in our life. We want to grow. We all have different vehicles that we can step into to try out, to test. For me, I step into this world of podcasting with one clear objective, and that is to hopefully meet entrepreneurs, founders, and ideally be in rooms like this. That was my goal. We don't know how it's all gonna come full circle and connect, but that is our dream, that is our hope, and I believe everyone, even if you have some success, you still feel that way. Everyone is here to hopefully learn something, and you do that by listening. And the advice I'm about to share was not only the advice I shared on that day, but I want you guys to start this conversation with. And it was in that moment my life changed forever.
So this guy is super successful, down to earth, great guy, Casey Adams.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I promise. Wow, what an intro. First off, David, I want to say thank you so much for having me here tonight. And thank you to all the speakers that spoke before me. You guys were incredible, and ladies. And to really kick off this 10, 15 minutes that we have here before we get to Q&A, I really want to dive into a story that I think is very relevant to not only my life today, but the exact moment that we are sharing together. So first I want to start off by a raise of hands. Who was familiar with the legendary Larry King? I want a raise of hands. Hopefully everyone in the room knows who Larry King is. So I'll start with this. Yesterday was a very important day for me. It was the 5-year anniversary that since I interviewed Larry King when I was 19 years old, 2 years into my podcasting journey. And little did I know at the time that that interview would end up being the last long form interview that he would ever do. And the day he passed away, I remember it so vividly. I get a DM from BBC World News. They're saying, "Hey, Casey, we saw your interview with Larry. It's sort of one of the last interviews we saw. We'd love to have you come on air and speak about what you learned from Larry King." And the advice I'm about to share was not only the advice I shared on that day, but I want you guys to start this conversation with. There was a moment during that interview where I'm sitting looking at Larry and he says to me, "You know what, Casey? The one lesson that I've learned throughout my entire career is I've never learned anything while I was talking. And therefore be a great listener." Very simple advice. But at the time, and before I give you some context on my journey in my life, I'm 19 years old. This legendary man is 87. And you could feel it in his energy, how he carries himself, how into that conversation, just how truly special he was, not only as a listener, but as a broadcaster. And that's the context of today. Everyone is here to hopefully learn something, and you do that by listening. And to take you really to the beginning, my journey started when I was 16 years old. I come from a very small town in Richmond, outside of Richmond, Virginia, on the East Coast. And growing up, my dad, he worked in a tobacco factory, Philip Morris. My mom's a special ed teacher. And growing up, I had absolutely zero entrepreneurial mentors, figures in my life. And it wasn't until a truly traumatic moment that I will share here in a moment that everything changed for me. And I believe the situation that I will describe, we will all go through, we all deal with our own challenges in our own ways. For me, it was sophomore year of high school. I'm 15 years old, turning 16 years old. I'm a football player. I played sports my whole life, hockey, lacrosse, football. Sophomore year of high school, first day of hitting practice, I end up going head to head with the guys a little bit bigger than me, and end up landing on my neck wrong. And as a 16-year-old kid, you're used to getting beat up on the field. You're like, all right, my neck hurts, but that's okay. Woke up the next day, I can barely move my head, 1 centimeter to the left, 1 centimeter to the right, start to go kind of into freak out mode, like what's going on here? Go to the doctor, get an x-ray, thinking still optimistically, which I think as we all may do. Doctor comes back in the room, I'm with my mom, and he goes, I have some good news and I have some bad news for you. The good news is you're clearly walking and you're not paralyzed. But the bad news is you have what's called interspinous ligament damage. You have to be in a neck brace for the next 5 to 6 months. You can no longer play football again, ever. And based on how you recover, we can really dictate if you can snowboard or play lacrosse or whatever it is you want to do. And it was in that moment my life changed forever. And not only did it change forever, but I didn't even recognize it at the time, which I believe is such an important aspect of the story I'm about to share, because we are all here today, hopefully, want some change in our life. We want to grow. And sometimes the change you're looking for is the change that you do not expect. And I remember at that time, I'm 16 years old, I'm then depressed. I don't know what I want to do with my life, my time. I'm in this neck brace, literally cannot move, and I'm in this for 18 hours a day. And the first 3 months kind of go into this depression period of I don't know what I want to do with my life. But then the last 3 months, and I'll relate exactly what Casey was speaking before me, that was a period of my life where I was in such an immersive mode of just on social media, on YouTube, on Instagram, where I start just feeling and getting some sort of advice that I wasn't even seeking from people like Gary Vaynerchuk or Tony Robbins and these figures online that were just slowly but surely getting integrated in my life. And I remember vividly, there was a topic that started coming up a lot, and that was podcasting. And that's what I'm here to really talk about tonight, not only to give you context on my journey, but the power of podcasting and how it can be impactful for your business. And I remember it very clearly, hearing the word podcast at the time in 2017. I'm 16 years old, turning 17. I'm like, all right, Joe Rogan, I've heard of him, but like, what is this medium? And I was reading Gary Vaynerchuk's book, Crushing It. And the last chapter, he talked about podcasting. And I want to really bring this up so that everyone can walk away with some tangible advice, which is he gave sort of a vehicle, something that you could step into to experiment with, whether that's in a business context, software or real estate or sales, whatever it may be. We all have different vehicles that we can step into to try out, to test. For me, unbeknownst at the time, I stepped into this world of podcasting with one clear objective, and that is to hopefully meet entrepreneurs, founders, and ideally be in rooms like this. I was in this neck brace, no entrepreneurial peers around me, start seeing these people and I think, wow, how can I learn something new? How can I meet these great founders? And podcasting was my outlet. And over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, I ended up doing 150 interviews, primarily all online. I had a pair of $100 Apple, wired Apple headphones. I was doing sort of like Facebook Lives, calling them podcasts, no high quality video content that I do today. And fast forward from December 21st, so coming up in 10 days now, it will be my 7-year anniversary of hosting my show. And the important note I want to reference there is this vehicle of podcasting, some may call it personal branding, whatever it may be. Everyone here not only has a story, but there are incredibly impactful vehicles out there that can amplify everything that you do in business. And podcasting for me has been just that, in the sense of my entire career, the foundation of my business journey has stemmed from podcasting that you all so well described. And for me, and a piece of advice that we'll get to at the end that I'll dive more into, is getting clarity on why you especially start a podcast is one of the most important things. And the reason I started my show is very similar to why I started it today. And that is I want to meet great people, I want to learn from them, and I want to create business opportunity. And at the time, and I believe we can all relate to this, that was my goal. We don't know how it's all going to come full circle and connect, but that is our dream, that is our hope. And I believe everyone, even if you have some success, you still feel that way. And to give you some context, over the last 7 years, I've interviewed 500 different founders, one being, the legendary Larry King, that for me is sits at the top of the pedestal, someone that I learned so much from. And I don't just reference these names to reference these names. I reference them for context that I'll get into. I've had people like Elon Musk's mom and sister, the founder of Netflix, the 12 different billionaires, the owner of the Houston Rockets, the owner of the Phoenix Suns, all these different characters, to also friends of mine that you would never hear of, but their stories are so impactful. And I reference that because this 16, 17-year-old kid that was just hoping to interview anyone and everyone, slowly but surely, by simply taking shots, primarily on Instagram DM, cold emails. We'll get into all the tactics, and I'm very excited to answer some questions. That's what started this whole thing. And as David was saying, he's talking about my previous company, Media Kits, which was a data analytics company. How that came full circle for me, and I really want everyone in this room to take a step back and ask yourself, how is the thing I'm working on complementing every aspect of my goals? For me, again, the podcast, meet great people, learn from them, create business opportunity. Fast forward to 2020, I'm hosting my podcast for 3 years. I have this idea, and that idea for my previous company was MediaKits.com. It was the easiest way for creators, podcasters, athletes to aggregate all of their cross-platform social analytics into one place, so that if David says, "Hey, Casey, I have this event I want you to speak at. Show me all of your analytics so I can take a look and do the deep dive." You would send to MediaKits.com/Casey Adams, and that's that. So, not being someone that previously founded a software company, I didn't know what I didn't know, but I did know you needed money. So luckily, I had some great mentors at the time, and we go ahead and kick off our pre-seed round of fundraising. And I reference this story because that was the moment for me that things came full circle, that I believe everyone here today, by the end of this conversation, if you can start planting seeds in a vehicle, whether that's your personal brand, whether that's your podcast, I believe in 3, 5, 7 years like myself, things can start to come full circle if you put in the time. And I say full circle because when we kicked off our fundraise, who do I start going to for advice on the company, on the pitch deck, on everything we're doing? That is my past guests on my podcast, the 500 or at the time, like 300 or so people I've interviewed. And long story short, we end up raising money from around 37 different angel investors, Wiz Khalifa, David Meltzer, all these great, wonderful people. And 95% of the capital we raised for that company came from the podcast, the past guests on my podcast. And I remember after we closed the round, we had this big launch party in LA. Wiz Khalifa was, he performed at the end. We had 700 creators. And I remember after all the craziness of the company launched, I sat there and said, wow, not only was it the podcast that created these opportunities, it was finding the right vehicle that I could attach myself to and commit to for a long enough period of time where the results could actually come full circle. Because again, whether it's podcasting for you or doing live events like this, whatever it may be, finding a vehicle to get in the room with people that you want to learn from, that you want to build with is, in my opinion, as someone who's 24 right now, that's gone through this crazy journey from not knowing a single mentor at 16 years old to almost being paralyzed to raising millions of dollars and selling my company 24 months later to then, trying to go ahead and do it again with my new company, listener.com. It all starts with people. And I believe all the speakers here tonight, as well as the people you see on Instagram, the business of people is getting more and more important in the world of AI, in the sense of, who do people do business with? They do business with people. And before I not only wrap up this, but I really love the Q&A aspect. Podcasting to me, and to the story of Larry King, his advice and his feedback and his the main takeaway that I had from that conversation was simply, as I said before, you never learn anything while you were talking. Be a great listener. And not only did that advice throughout all these years, that I like to say when people ask me, what is the number one thing you've learned from your podcasting journey, and all the guests, that's the advice I go to because it's so relevant for every single person. And I took that advice and that inspiration so far where not only do I try to take every conversation for my podcast in the truest sense of being a listener, but the dang name of my new company is called listener.com. And it really stemmed from that interview and that piece of advice. And really just to give everyone the context necessary, like where we specialize at listener.com is we're kind of an ecosystem of podcasting stemming from post-production software tools for creators, podcast networks, and production companies, all the way to helping founders and tech executives get booked on top-tier podcasts. And business aside, what I believe is so incredibly valuable going into 2025 is not only podcasting as a medium, because it has shifted. The podcast that I started 7 years ago was on a pair of, again, wired Apple headphones, no video content. And today, more than ever, I believe the quality matters more than ever. I don't know if anyone here, who's here familiar with a podcaster named Chris Williamson? Anyone here familiar? So yeah, he's wonderful. To give you some context, his sets over the years, the set where he does the podcast, went from, similar to me, sitting down with someone on a Blue Yeti microphone, to now he's spending upwards of 6 figures for an interview with Matthew McConaughey in this beautiful studio. And I'm just referencing that because who here, just to show of hands, who here has thought about starting a podcast or has a podcast themselves? Okay, large majority of people, I love that. I believe now more than ever is the best time to really go all in with a show, because not only is it more competitive, and yes, that could be a good or bad thing, but the industry itself, like I spend so much time in the weeds of this space, someone that's building in it, there's a true foundation now. The companies in the space, the money pouring in the space, the presidential election being, some would say, determined by such. Podcasting is not just a word anymore where you're sitting down with friends just rambling for hours. It is a true business vehicle that, as you said, Casey, and all the other speakers, the personal brand element of how you can sit down with someone, get to know them, create business opportunity with them. I look at it as the best sort of tactic, one would call it, that you could ever use in your business, whether that's for sales strategies. And we work with many companies where we'll help them launch a podcast to really help their outbound sales strategies when it's a B2B market. I know I'm going on different routes here with the world of podcasting, but I just can't get enough of this space. And I believe that everyone here today, when it comes to the industry itself, but also the value that is really built within it, is the aspect of listening. And I believe as a business owner, as someone that's looking to become more and more successful, listening to your customer, listening to your team, listening to anyone around you, what you can learn from them, what to do, what not to do. The power of being a listener is not just profound, but I believe it's something that all of us moving into the next year not only should do of, but if you do more of it intentionally, your business, your relationships, everything in your life can get elevated. And with that note, I would love to do some Q&A. Right here. Thank you. What's your name? Olga. So nice to meet you.
Casey, I met you in 2020 at Influencer Marketing Fair.
I love that. So good to see you.
There with your beautiful girlfriend.
Yes.
And I have a question about balance. How you balance your work and that beautiful relationship. I follow you guys for the last 4 years.
Thank you so much.
How is this possible? I mean, the way you guys do.
So if there's one thing I'm most proud of, it's I'm getting married in 5 months. So I'm very excited for that. Thank you. Yeah, now you guys come give me some advice. No, it's, it's so funny about our relationship. My now fiance, Jacqueline, we met, she's actually, David Meltzer he's been a mentor of mine for years. Everyone familiar with David Meltzer? Which a lot of you are. So it's David Meltzer's cousin is Jacqueline, my fiance. So David's like family now. And, the word of balance, and I think in relationships, this is our relationship journey, as everyone's, is so unique. But I was 20 years old at the time when we started dating. And I believe that the level of commitment that I've had in my relationship has translated to my business, where, when I'm in high school, I start taking the least amount of classes that I can because I want to go all in on my business. I believe for me, and not only why we've grown so well, it's almost been 5 years together, it's just the true level of commitment and trust there. But, I think the word balance, I've always had a hard time with that, because I think there's seasons in life and in business, right? In that 0 to 1 phase in a relationship, you're probably spending a lot more time together and intimacy. Same thing in business, where if you're starting a software company, you need to get the MVP done, but minimum viable product, or even getting a sales team built out. That 0 to 1 phase is going to require so much effort than what's required, 10 years down the road. You see Elon Musk with all the different companies he's had, but the hardest part was getting it started. And I believe that seasons in life are so important, and to really take a step back and say, what season am I in, right? Am I in this 0 to 1 phase, and how does that change over time? And again, there's no one size fits all, but I've always had a hard time with the word balance, in a sense. That's my feedback or advice. Of course, I'm so good to see you.
Did you interview David yet?
No, we're doing it here soon. Well, we're going to make that happen.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Right here.
Adam, what have you find? What have you find to be the best way to market a podcast? I know you've spoken to a lot of different people. You've been a guest on a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Personally, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the best way to market a podcast, there's obviously the things that may be front and center, meaning baseline, video content, clips on social media. That's like the new standard. It used to be like, okay, some of the shows had clips. Now it's, you need to be putting out so many clips. from the podcast itself. But I think some of the non-traditional ways that maybe people can learn from here tonight, which is when you're running a show and you really want to build a listener base, it's one at a time. And I say that because, there's the quote from Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb. His famous quote is, "Do things that don't scale." And I believe that in the world of podcasting and like truly building an engaged listener base, get as much feedback as possible from the people that are listening. Like spend time talking to that one person in the DM and really get feedback. Like don't just say like, "Oh, glad you listened to the show." Get feedback and understand why people are listening and make changes. When I first started my show, I was doing individual shows. Then I switched to like a guest every now and then. Now I always bring on guests. Funny enough, like my show has changed over the time. Like when I was running my training for my first marathon, I was interviewing a lot of athletes. When I was raising a round of funding for my company, I was interviewing a lot of venture capitalists. And I think to build a show, it needs to be so transparent to you and authentic to you in a world of podcasts where there's so much of similar information. So I'd say do things initially that don't scale. Stick to the foundation of you got to have the video, you got to have the short form content, of course. But think outside the box and really say, how can I really build a trusted relationship with these listeners from the get-go? So that'd be my advice. Of course. Eddie, thank you so much. One more question.
What was the thing that made you like just scale when you just became just a big brand? What was that? Was it an ad?
Personal brand or media kits?
For your podcast.
Yeah, I think in 2017 when I started my show, I think maybe you call it like guest arbitrage, right? Like I remember the first 120 interviews, just to name some names. Like I had Andy Frisella, I think it was my 30th interview, Ed Milet, Gary Vaynerchuk, all these people that I looked up to, still do, that have now become friends and mentors. But I think nowadays more than ever, it remains true in the sense of when I do a collaboration post on Instagram with my now friend Robert Greene, the author of 48 Laws of Power, I can not even a miss. It's always boom, 500,000 views, 1 million views. And I believe that you need to find those types of guests, not just for the views, not for the audience, but how do you create an unfair advantage, right? Like I was a huge fan of Robert Greene. And matter of fact, what led to my interview with Rick Ross was he was the biggest fan of Robert Greene, and I knew that, and he was obsessed with him. And I ended up reaching out to Rick Ross saying, "Hey, Rick Ross, I'm a big fan of your music. I saw that you are a huge fan of Robert Greene. I just had him on my podcast. It'd be such an honor to have you on as well." And long story short, I mentioned that because when I interviewed Rick Ross, the big rapper, that ended up getting picked up on World Star and all these different like music-related channels. And again, that's not an easily duplicated process, but I was the person that's like, how do I interview anyone? Like you got to shoot your shot and you really got to start thinking about how do you leverage the other, I don't want to call them guests, but just the traffic from others to build a show and to get viewership. And I think that goes to any like big guests. Like one of my 2 top interviews are with Jordan Belfort from the Wolf of Wall Street. That one was crazy. And then Tyler Winklevoss, one of the like Bitcoin billionaire, the Bitcoin billionaire brothers. That one was huge for me as well because when I interviewed him in 2020, crypto was going through such an interesting time there. So I think following trends and having guests on that can talk about things that first you're interested in, so it's actually a genuine, authentic show. But then understanding like who are the people that I can have on that will maybe bring some more eyeballs to me. I think that's super important. Yeah, love it. Thank you so much, and thank you, David. Appreciate it. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.